It's go time.
Welcome to the Third Down Gamble podcast with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham.
We are now working our way through the off season, which is always tough. It feels like I'm in remorse when we get into this part of it because the training camps are so many months away. In the interim, we do have other things to talk about. Number one, in the as if I didn't know that category, Davis Alexander and Jason Moss talking about his hamstring injury. Now, we know it was a grade 3C, which is a tear, but not off the bone, thankfully for him. And that means no surgery. Jason Moss also came out and said it happened in April, which I kind of knew from other reports, that for his wishes toward Davis Alexander is work, but don't tweak.
And the result of this conversation was perhaps overtraining led to some of this additional strain on the hamstring. As we get to know Davis Alexander as a player, as a quarterback in this league, you can see how driven he is, how dedicated, and you can't blame the guy. This was his opportunity to be the starting quarterback, to show that he can lead this team. He wanted to do everything he could to be out there, but maybe he just overextended himself. The drive to get back on the field after suffering the first injury led to the second injury, led to the third injury. There was no quit in this guy, but it will be a bit of a wake-up call, and perhaps he'll be smarter in how he goes about that training in the offseason.
You're exactly right. He was benching up to 500 pounds in the offseason, and he is like sort of a tank out there. He is really thick, and that's because of all the effort that he puts into his workouts. But there's a point at which you need some elasticity. And I've argued this, I think even on this podcast, maybe a few seasons ago, where the players of today are wound so tight that there's no room to allow anything to move. And granted, all the ligaments and tendons and muscles are functioning properly. But if you overextend, is there any elasticity left to allow for that? Or does it just say, oops, I'm stretched too far already. Thank you. Bing.
And part of that's the specialization of athletes in this day and age as well, where so much of that focus is on one sport, one specific job within a sport, and you can really isolate and lose some of the flexibility. It comes into play in these types of situations, or even how a player absorbs a hit or is tackled. If they're doing some other things in the off season, be it pick up basketball, water skiing, downhill skiing, who knows what other activities they participate in. It builds up muscles differently. It trains the body differently and allows you some different movements that can help prevent these injuries.
Muscle been torn right off the bone. That's big surgery. And then he's out for the season. He is gone for whatever comes after that. The grade 2A one, which is the other one that he had, is a more of a minor issue. You've got to be careful with it too. You don't want to over exercise it in the best way I can describe it and look at maybe something worse. You hope, and I know the Alouettes are going to be following up on this. Montreal is going to say to him, yeah, work out, but these are the prescriptions. This is what you're going to do. This is what you can do. And this is what you're not allowed to do.
And that's the right way to approach it. This is a team effort. They see the abilities of Davis Alexander, what he can bring to the table. They're going to want to protect that asset, if you will, and working closely with that training staff, with the medical team to A, make sure he recovers and heals from this injury, and B, that he goes about things the right way to be in peak condition for next season, and hopefully for the Alouettes, another deep playoff run.
With him at the helm, and if he is healthy, the Alouettes are going to be a force for the foreseeable future. There is a guy on the other coast that's probably going to do the same for a team that wears black and orange. You'll hear in the podcast with Steve Daniel that'll come out on Christmas Eve, we talk about what if those two ever cross paths in a Grey Cup? What would that mean? I think it would be fantastic. People know that I'm a Rough Riders fan. Hey, I also respect the fact that when you got something great to watch, why not?
The marquee matchups are what you want to see. And as much of a draw as having the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the Grey Cup is for attendance, and this past Grey Cup was very well viewed, both in French and English in Canada. So you've got the Alouettes drawing that French crowd. You've got the Roughriders drawing a big nationwide following as well. But when you've got those rising stars, and we talked about Nathan Rourke being the face of the league, Davis Alexander, what he's done in his first year as a starter, those are guys that you can really build a marketing campaign around. And if they were to go head to head, two young quarterbacks really trying to take ownership of the league, that would be a very exciting matchup.
I couldn't agree more. If you can get these two with classic games going toe to toe, this would be fantastic for the league. I hope that somewhere in the marketing circles of this league, they've already glommed on to that and that they're going to push this as hard as they can, because you've got two rising stars, one in the East and one in the West. That's not ignoring who else could be coming up. But for the time being, those are the two that are probably most pointed to as who could be the great next ones. Push this to the limit. Get people excited. There's a lot of great football to be played in this league, and these two will be leading the charge.
I know we talked about this a couple seasons ago. I believe we had Rob Vanstone on and kind of talked about the future quarterbacks in the league. And because we had some of those aging players at the time, Jeremiah Mazzoli, we still have Trevor Harris, Zach Collaros, Bo Levi Mitchell, and we were talking about where the next guys were going to come from. I don't recall. Nathan Rourke may have been a bit of a topic of conversation at that point. Davis Alexander certainly wasn't on the radar at all. We've got Trey Ford still out there in the CFL as well, wherever he ends up. We know this past draft year, Saskatchewan and Winnipeg both drafted young Canadian quarterbacks, as did the Montreal Alouettes. So there's three other Canadian quarterbacks that are hopefully for us as fans on CFL rosters in the near future.
It all depends on how far they want to push their NFL opportunities. Do they want to keep pushing the envelope in terms of trying to get tryouts? And if they can make another tryout, sort of a la what Nathan Rourke did, where he went through 12 different tryouts just to get somebody to throw out a contract offer. He actually got more than one, I believe, eventually, but he settled on Jacksonville. The hope is if you do it and somebody takes a shine into you, then maybe you get that extra big dough down in the States. Although I don't know a practice roster, if you make that much compared to what you would be as a starter in the CFL.
It would be fairly comparable, I believe, and you would have that benefit of starting games. It's as much as players chase the NFL dream, you want to play in the NFL when you look at those offers. You don't necessarily want to be that third or fourth string guy on a practice roster without a hope of seeing any game time. Strange things happen, and sometimes those guys do work their way up, either through attrition of injuries to quarterbacks ahead of them, or they show some promise and get promoted, if you will. But at the end of the day, showcasing your talent in the CFL and getting that starting quarterback money is a pretty good way to make a living.
You talk about getting your opportunity. Now here's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers signing UFL MVP and Super Bowl champion. That was with the LA Rams, Bryce Perkins. They put his pen to paper and got him a tryout contract with the Blue Bombers. You talk about a guy, he wasn't drafted in 2020. He sort of makes his way into the NFL. He happens to be on the roster of the Rams when they win the Super Bowl on the practice roster, but he does eventually get in because of attrition, injuries, and play a few games. He made one start. He's done well with the UFL, and now the Blue Bombers have signed him to see if they've got somebody behind Zach Collaros. Now, does that sort of rock the boat in Winnipeg in terms of Tyler Elgersma? Does that ever sort of dissuade the thought that Drew Brown is coming back at some point? And what does that do with all the people already there?
To me, this sends the message that Chris Streveler is likely done with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Another devastating leg injury has his football future in jeopardy anyway. Terry Wilson, the Bombers, for whatever reason, never really gave him an opportunity. He took some snaps due to injury. Even in mop-up duty, they were hesitant to put him out on the field. It doesn't speak much to their confidence in him. There was talk earlier this week as well about Taylor Elgersma and the Bombers pursuing getting him up here. Bryce Perkins and Taylor Elgersma, two guys on that roster learning from Zach Collaros for one season, could be very beneficial. I'm hesitant to anoint Bryce Perkins as a starter in the CFL. Bomber fans will certainly remember World League of American Football MVP TJ Rubley signing with the Blue Bombers, and he was going to be the next big thing in Winnipeg. That was the Reinbold era. The wins did not come. Rubley was quickly bounced around and eventually out of the league. Bryce Perkins does have a little bit of NFL pedigree. So does PJ Walker in Calgary. That wasn't a success story. So you never know. I'm happy to see them taking a chance on bringing somebody new in, because I don't believe Strebler was the answer ever to be that next starting quarterback. Maybe Elgersma and Perkins can fight over that job.
Superfan Mike, friend of the show, has always said, the answer is always no until you ask the question. I kind of like the idea that you keep beating the bushes and see who's out there. As we mentioned off the top, Davis Alexander, who heard of him until the Alouettes brought him into town? You just don't know who that person's going to be. And what you want is will, desire, some understanding of the Canadian game, but that can be taught. But then that intangible of he's got that win attitude at all costs. I want this team to win. We see that with Alexander, with Nathan Rourke. We see that with Vernon Adams Jr., with Bo Levi Mitchell. There's a whole host of people like that. You need that sort of strength of character to propel your team forward.
And this is why the CFL negotiation lists are so chock full of quarterbacks. Some teams are very quarterback heavy, but every team in the league has multiple American quarterbacks on that negotiation list, because you're right, you never know. Even a player that doesn't show a lot in college, the CFL is a very different game, and it might be a better fit. Bryce Perkins has had 270 yards rushing in the UFL last year, along with 9 touchdown passes in 7 games. He's got some mobility, obviously. That can be something that can be a benefit in the CFL. We know how important scrambling ability is. You're not just looking for a standard pocket passer on every down in the CFL. You need a guy that can move the pocket, that can scramble and throw accurately on the run. He maybe is a great fit for the CFL.
Now, Trevor Harris, a person who really doesn't fit that bill in terms of scrambling ability, he used to be able to run a little bit, can throw on the run, and led the Rough Riders to the 2025 Grey Cup, has left Regina on a 23-hour trek to drive home back to Ohio. That is a long couple of days. The sense from the Rough Riders is that, especially given that the speech he gave in the parade for the champions, was that he's coming back for 2026. And I think in Corey Mace's mind, he wants him back because there's a real strong belief that this team is going to be a contender again next year with him at the helm.
That's a great assumption. I would believe that the Riders will be competing for first place in the West as well. The one risk you take with aging players is sometimes that drop off can be drastic. We know Harris has suffered some leg injuries and had a lot of time on the injured list previous to the 2025 season. He remained healthy this past season, led the team to a championship. He's pushing 40 years old. That drop could come very quickly. And Jake Mayer is questioning where his CFL future is right now, especially if Trevor Harris comes back. The Riders could be very successful and run it back with Harris at the helm to another championship, or we could see a drop off. And then where do they go? If Mayer's gone, Jack Cohn was the other quarterback that saw some playing time other than Tommy Stevens. Do the Riders have confidence in that, or are they putting all their eggs in the Trevor Harris basket?
We'll soon find out, because that's Harris's decision to make in the first circumstance. Then they've got to talk contract. That could impact his decision as well if the Rough Riders want to bring it down a little bit to save some room for somebody else. Because there are going to be other free agents from a Grey Cup champion that want to get paid. If Harris decides to leave and Mayer is kind of in the wings saying, okay, it's my time now, do you feel confident with Jake Mayer? He had that good start with the Calgary Stampeders, but since then, he's the guy that has not really produced in terms of, and I'll say, passes down the field. He tends to be the guy that does the dump off behind the line of scrimmage. Do you want that? Jack Cohn, is he ready to step up? Or is Curtis Rourke, who they've got drafted, is he going to be coming to town, and maybe they hope that'll fix it? I think you're right, though. They're looking heavily onto the Trevor Harris agenda and seeing if there's a point at which they say, yeah, he's for sure coming back. We've got him, and then can make some informed decisions about the rest.
You're waiting for that first domino to fall, and it's a big one to get things started. I would not second guess Trevor Harris at all if he decided to ride off into the sunset with a Grey Cup this year. A great way to go out on top. As you said, it sounds like he's got that drive and determination to run it back one more time with the Riders. More power to him if they're successful doing it.
Now, talking about running it back, we got Trey Vavel, who did a lot of that with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers this past season. He's getting a workout with the New York Jets. Now, Vavel may be in a situation where the field goal return may not be a part of the game much anymore because of what's going to happen in 2027. We just don't know how that's all going to play out. Essentially, you're going to need a short field goal attempt for anybody to take off with it. The Vavel experiment with Winnipeg went very well, although his defensive back play left something to be desired in terms of his coverage. He was, though, young and learning, and you've got to cut him a lot of slack. I'm curious to see what the Jets will do.
I am as well. And are they looking at him solely as a return specialist, which in the NFL isn't the same importance as it is in the CFL? A lot of NFL return guys have to stand there and wave and catch a fair catch punt. Vavel had some issues early on this season fielding the ball. So I would think that would be a concern for those NFL teams. He got better. He exploded after he was able to secure the ball better. As far as the defensive back, you are looking at a narrower field. He's got speed to burn. Is that something that they're comfortable in trying to teach him as he goes? It was a challenge at times for the Blue Bombers with him in the secondary for sure. And we often saw it was out of necessity when injuries occurred that he got thrust into that role. The Jets are also working out Isaiah Wooden from the Hamilton Tiger Cats and Damian Alford from the Calgary Stampeders. So the Jets, obviously somebody in that office has their finger on the pulse of the CFL. Wooden's another return guy, a different build to Trey Vavel. So interesting to see if any of these guys can stick on that Jets roster.
Body type does matter to the NFL, where in the CFL, you need a lot more, I think, dexterity than you do in the NFL. The NFL, you have to run straight up and down because of the width of the field. You just can't get to the outside like you can here. And Vavel was a very straight up and down runner. He rarely went left or right. He went straight up, but just used his speed and his agility. He's very prototypical for the NFL that way, where Wooden, yeah, I think he would have a strong chance as well, a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. But again, the New York Jets, though, they are a team that is a perpetual state of struggle. You look at them last quarter century. When was the last time they made a run in the playoffs? I know for a player, it doesn't matter because you could be the reason why they turn the corner. I'm sure these players are interested in doing so.
As we talked about with the quarterbacks earlier, you absolutely want to see these guys succeed. And anytime a player that was previously on a CFL roster goes down and makes an NFL roster and is an impact player, I think as a league, we kind of celebrate it. As much as we miss seeing them on the CFL field, the NFL is the big time as far as football goes in North America, across the world. It's the big time. It's the big show for anybody. And I think of a prime example is Alex Singleton, who had a lot of success with the Calgary Stampeders and has been a stalwart defensive player, a team captain in the NFL. That's the kind of success that we want to see players achieve. There are a handful that have gone recently and stuck with NFL rosters. Nobody has broke out to that level of Alex Singleton lately. I'm sure the next guy's chomping at the bit to show what he can do.
Well, I remember Quintez Stiggers, who was with the Toronto Argonauts, and now he's starting in the NFL as well. It does happen. It's just, it doesn't happen as much as maybe people would like, or maybe people would think. But the CFL is a different game. You're the needs requirement for the type of player that you have to have in the Canadian game is slightly different than that of the NFL. And yes, the NFL is the king, but it's more the king because of the money behind it, not necessarily the play or the fun that you have playing it. The CFL, I've talked to how many different players. They say they love playing here because the game is just so much fun to play. Going to the BC Lions. Keon Hatcher is looking for a better contract as he goes into the free agency period, which is about to come up. He's 31 years old, but he had a fantastic season. In fact, he had a fantastic season prior to blowing out his Achilles, which hampered him through the 2024 season. Now that he's got a chance to go FA and do something to get paid, do you think the Lions can keep him in-house, given that they've got Justin McInnes to pay as well? Maybe they're going to renegotiate Nathan Rourke and bump him up a little bit. Do the Lions have room for this?
It will be a challenge to keep Keon Hatcher in the mix, given what he's said about testing free agency. Although we've seen guys go for the money before, Eugene Lewis and Kenny Lawler spring to mind. Lawler left a successful team in Winnipeg to go play for Edmonton. He did not enjoy that experience. In fact, he said the next season, if he could give advice to anybody, it would be to not sign in Edmonton. So he chased the dollar for 1 year, came back to Winnipeg, had some success, and then had a breakout year or another great year in Hamilton this year with Bo Levi Mitchell. Eugene Lewis has bounced around a little bit after being that top guy in Montreal as well. Sometimes that comfort level of what you know can draw you back in. And I think the BC Lions are hoping that's the case with Keon Hatcher, that they can maybe get him at a little bit of a discount. If somebody's throwing a lot of money at him, like the Elks did with Kenny Lawler, it's hard to compete when you've got that much invested in some other star players.
Well, they've had some tough negotiations already. Now, this goes back to the offseason prior, where Hatcher was released just prior to his scheduled offseason bonus. And then they sort of had a second thought and started to talk about this year after that. And they got him onto a 1-year contract. But because he didn't get that bonus, his actual salary went down. Now, overall, he made $168,000. But a lot of that was performance enhanced money. So in other words, if you made 1,000 yards, you got this, all these bonuses that you can tie into a contract. I think he wants more base and he wants more security. And that comes with bonuses. Of course, with you sign with a bonus, they can always cut you the day before. Happens a lot because A, it gives the team some room, and B, it gives the players some certainty. Now, in Hatcher's case, they did come to some accommodation to get him back on the field, and he had a fantastic season. He is top level receiver. Granted, he's 31, but he's probably got 2 to 3 good years left in him where he can stay at that status. And Ryan Rigmaiden had said in no uncertain terms he wants to keep the band together. But when you got Justin McInnes and Javon Catoy making big money already, is there enough room in that cap?
If not BC, who else is going to throw that money at him where he can be happy and successful? That's the question as well. He's going to want to be that go-to receiver, the playmaker, wherever he ends up. There's a few spots that have that guy already. So it's who's got the cap room that can make him the offer. Although I think we've seen some mistakes of throwing too much money at the top receiver in the league as well. It can kind of backfire on you. And if something happens where that guy goes down hurt, you've got so much invested in him that the receiving core as a whole suffers a little bit.
You look at Kenny Lawler, he's making $300,000 with the Ticats. Now, Tim White, is that a person that maybe the Ticats say, okay, we're not going to make a move? The Lions come and say, we'll pick you up. Maybe we'll get a better deal on Tim White, and Keon Hatcher winds up in Hamilton as a result. Those are the types of equations that we'll have to wait 90 days to kind of find out how this plays out in the spring of 2026 when free agency goes in earnest. I don't think that Hatcher wants to be the top paid receiver, but I think he wants to get in that grouping of the top paid receivers.
And that's reasonable, given what we've seen out of him when he's healthy and on his game. He can make the big plays. Absolutely, he should be considered in that probably top 5 for sure receivers in the CFL, and really, certainly in his mind, and he's proven it on field, maybe in that top 2 or 3.
The Ottawa Redblacks have also made a bit of a splash by signing Heck Crichton Trophy winner Ethan Jordan. Now, Jordan had been with the training camp of the Redblacks in 2025, stayed on the practice roster for a little while, and then he went back to school where he went out and had a banner year with the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks. The team made it to the Yates Cup, which is the OUA, or Ontario Universities Association, championship game for the third straight year, and he set a career record for players in the OUA, receivers, I should say, in the OUA, with 239 receptions. And he sits, like, I think it is second in touchdowns and receiving yards as well. So he's got a ton of stats coming out of school. He's also a speedster, a 4.4 40, which goes great when he's recorded in Regina. I think the Redblacks are looking to shore up that receiving core because injuries really devastated them last year. They need bodies.
They do. And same thing with keeping Drew Brown healthy. We saw numerous 400-plus yard games out of Drew Brown when he's upright and able to throw the ball. To have a Canadian receiver this highly rated, putting up those kinds of numbers with that speed, is a huge asset to that receiving core. Good on the Redblacks for being able to bring him in, and it'll be exciting to watch what he does in 2026 and hopefully in a lengthy CFL career.
Just for our American audience or those in the world, the Heck Crichton Award is a similar designation in Canada that the Heisman holds in the United States. In other words, that's the top player in the country.
Great to see it go to somebody other than a quarterback as well. You know, you've got a special player at another position when they can beat out some of those top quarterbacks in the league to win the overall award. 3
Down Nation has put out a list of players that could wind up having shots at the NFL. And this is typically players that are still under contract, but there's that window that you have right now that you can go down and take a look and see if there's any interest. And if there's a workout, then go for it. Damien Alford comes to mind, although I don't think that will be a strong possibility. But Jacob Brammer, who had a great year with the Rough Riders, Robert Carter, who of course was highlight reel with the BC Lions, Jackson Finley, maybe, I doubt that one though, but Clarence Hicks, who had a chance at being in the NFL, did attend the training camp with the Bengals, but here he's trying to get back to the NFL. There's that window in the NFL world where you hit 26, 27, 28, somewhere in there. They don't want to invest anymore in you because you're going to have to be trained up. By the time you get good at it, you'll be 30, 31, and then you're maybe too old. They look for them young. If they're going to steal them out of the CFL, they try to get them before they're 25.
And right on that 25 number is Jalen Hutchings of the Calgary Stampeders as well. So a couple of defensive linemen in Calgary might get a look. You're right. Hicks' age may be a bit of a factor, but he had 12 sacks this past season. He's putting up numbers. Maybe somebody's looking at a 1-2 punch and can steal both of them away from the Stampeders in the CFL. Obviously, the two of them, Hutchings and Hicks, work well together. You can probably get them a little bit cheaper than a highly touted draft pick coming up through the NFL. If a team's wary of that, there's some talent for sure.
And Jacob Roberts, who I thought as a linebacker with the Stampeders was fantastic. And does he get that chance? He's 24. He's in that wheelhouse that the NFL is looking for. But again, these are all speculative names. This is based on sources that 3 Down have talked to that said that there's possibility that these guys are ahead of the curve in terms of opportunities. Would Devin Veresak be a possibility? Especially Canadians who've played in the CFL, not many make it to the NFL based on that tape that they've sent down from north of the 49th.
I think Veresak would be a bit of a stretch as well. We know he's got the skills, 240 pounds. He's a decent size for a linebacker. Sometimes guys that end up in the CFL are a little bit undersized by NFL standards, but I think he's right there in that size they're looking for. Again, we don't often see more than a couple stick with NFL rosters every year. So these 16 players on this list may all get tryouts, may get looks by teams. But when it comes to actual contract offers and not just practice roster assignments. Those jobs are hard to come by. We know they all want them, but as you said, are those American teams willing to take a chance on these CFL guys?
20 players last year went down to try. 7 got signed. All of them came back.
Hey, it's Dave Thomas, voice of your Saskatchewan Roughriders, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble podcast.
The head coach search continues for the Toronto Argonauts. They have had some interviews both in-house and brought in some externals. We know the story of Mike O'Shea and that opportunity not coming to fruition for the Argonauts, deciding to stay in Winnipeg. A couple names out there this week that are in that interview process: Jason Shivers, Rick Campbell, Kevin Iben. Mike Miller is another name that was out there. Any of those that you think are the front runner at this point?
I'm not sure. I would think that Miller would probably be ahead, although Jason Shivers has been with the Argos now. This would be his second year as a coach, but he had played defensive back with them years ago. So he's familiar with the market, familiar with how the Argos operate. Rick Campbell, that's a bit of an interesting one. He got the interview. I'm a little surprised. Again, we talked about this in a prior episode where that baggage out of BC is hanging around him like an anvil. Does he escape that? And maybe in Toronto, there's nothing saying that he's not a good coach. It's just what happened between the return of Nathan Rourke and Vernon Adams Jr. just turned into a total mess at the back half of the 24 season. It just makes it really tough to get away from that. And how much of a stigma is attached to that? Are the Argos willing to look past it and say, no, this guy actually took a team to a Grey Cup and won?
Given that Ryan Dinwiddie was head coach and offensive coordinator for the Argos, that creates a bit of a void there. Kevin Iben is a defensive-minded coach. He's a defensive coordinator. He's somebody that also, you want to talk about the Argonauts, he's spent plenty of time as both a player and a coach in that Argonauts organization. I have to think he's a strong candidate as well, but it just really depends on who he could surround himself with to fill that void on offense. A couple names that were also thrown out that outright turned the job down. Orlando Steinauer of the Hamilton Tiger Cats declined the interview, as did Corey Mace of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He said he's not interested in going anywhere, loves it in Saskatchewan, and coming off of a Grey Cup season with a 3-year extension, you can absolutely see why he doesn't want to go anywhere else.
I tossed out the idea that the Argos may come knocking in the last episode just as a flyer, just what if? Well, it came to fruition. Maybe the Argos are listening to this podcast and looking for ideas to who to talk to. Corey Mace is happy, and you're coming off a Grey Cup victory, and he's happy with Jeremy O'Day as well. I don't think that he has any ill will or bitterness towards the Argonauts. They gave him the defensive coordinatorship when he got the chance with Ryan Dinwiddie, and they were very supportive of him going after the head coaching job in Saskatchewan. I just think that for his family and for what the Rough Riders are doing right now, this really suits where he wants to be. And I don't think that there's any interest in going back to that market. Orlando Steinauer, that one, I thought maybe they'd have more of a chance, but Steinauer maybe likes the administrative role that he has. He doesn't lose any contact with day-to-day operations. In other words, talking to players, talking to coaches.
Steinauer had a tough run at the end of his head coaching career with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. The Ticats had enough faith in him to keep him in the organization, moving him into that front office role. This really depends on whether he had the will or the want to get back into coaching. Obviously, staying put right now in that football operations role, he likes where he is and didn't have that interest in getting back on the sidelines leading a team.
Who else could be in the interview room with the Toronto Argonauts? But we've heard that Mickey Donovan, for instance, special teams coordinator, he's had an opportunity to interview with the team. Pete Costanza is another one that has interviewed. This is tough for the Argonauts. Everything you do is under a microscope because it's Toronto. And also, you can't bring anyone into the interview room without 5 million people knowing about it. So there's nothing they can do quietly, it seems. I like the idea of Mickey Donovan because he's good with the players. The players respond to him. He's sort of got that Corey Mace about him. He's a very warm person. Maybe he might be just to get the morale back to where they want it to be. And then you look to see who's going to be your O coordinator and if Kevin Iben remains as your D coordinator. I don't imagine they're going to move away from Iben because that defense did get better as the season went on.
With the number of candidates that they've already talked about and talked to, and Ryan Dinwiddie jumping ship to that opportunity in Ottawa, does it point to some issues with the Argonauts organization and how they're run? Or are they doing their due diligence to make sure they've got the right guy? They're bringing lots of people in to talk to, named 6 guys already, plus O'Shea, plus reaching out to Steinauer and to Corey Mace. That's 9 people on that list of candidates. They're certainly exploring every option available to them.
I don't think there's a cultural or a team problem with the Toronto Argonauts. Michael Clemens is a very popular person. He's very good with people. He is their general manager. He's the one that's got that responsibility. They've already got Mike Murphy as the assistant general manager. They're not moving that brain trust around. So they want a head coach that can either just be head coach and they'll figure out the coordinatorship, or they'll get somebody and offensive and defensive. And this is where I think the Argonauts are going to head. Just because you've interviewed a lot of people doesn't mean you've got problems. They're doing their work to find as many people as possible to see what they need, what needs do they have, and who's fitting most of them. And I think the wider the net you cast, the more opportunities you have.
Fair enough. And like we said, they're the only team in the league currently looking for a head coach. So anybody with hopes of becoming a head coach in the league right now, there's a single lane going to Toronto for that job position. And I don't see any of the other ones coming available. I believe everybody else is pretty happy with what they've got. And this is that only option available. Lots of names, and perhaps some of them weren't waiting for the Argonauts to come knocking on their door. They've probably reached out to Toronto and said, hey, you've got an opening. I want this job.
They could have interviewed a lot more people. These are just the names that we're aware. There is still time for the Argonauts to make a decision. They don't have to rush into this. The season has ended, yes. We're not into winter meetings. We're not into any of that stuff. Buck Pierce was brought into BC and basically got going after the new year. There's nothing wrong with waiting for a couple more weeks to make sure. And there may be somebody that we don't know at all that they're really after and they're waiting for a response from.
When we talk about Mike Miller, we're going to shift gears here a little bit as well. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers were also granted permission to interview him for the offensive coordinator position. That job isn't officially open yet. Jason Hogan is still on paper the offensive coordinator for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Obviously, they are looking to change that as they've interviewed Tommy Condell and are interviewing Mike Miller, the quarterbacks coach of the Argonauts, not Mike Miller, the special teams coordinator of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But we could end up with a situation of multiple Mikes Miller on the Bombers coaching staff, as well as a Mike O'Shea. Anybody else named Mike, throw them into the mix as well.
I'm a little confused by this movement by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and I'll say it in this context. That's only his first year as O coordinator. And what was the drop-off that was so severe that the Bombers are panicking about this? They were already going backwards the last year that Buck Pierce was there, that the offense was aging. They didn't have Kenny Lawler this year, for one thing, and they were missing other receivers due to injury. But overall, the Bombers were a Midland offense. They were 6th overall in scoring. They were 5th overall in net offense, 2nd overall in rushing yards, and they were last in passing yards. So I'm wondering how much of this is Brady Oliveira talking to the coaching staff and saying, look, this guy isn't the right guy. Because remember, he outed Hogan midway through the season when he, being Brady Oliveira, wasn't getting the ball enough in Brady's mind. And he sort of said, I went and talked to the coach to air my grievances, and hopefully we got somewhere. I didn't like that commentary to begin with. I said that at the time. And I just wonder how much this is playing. And are you supposed to be listening to your leading running back when you're making these decisions.
It's not just the leading running back. The quarterback had some things to say about how the offense was run at the end of the season as well, saying that there was things that they ran in camp that they never saw again throughout the season. Yes, this was Jason Hogan's first year at the helm as offensive coordinator. Previous to this, as the backs coach, he and Brady Oliveira had a very strong relationship. Brady was very appreciative of everything that Coach Hogan did when he was accepting his Outstanding Player Awards in 2024. Something didn't jive this year with him as the offensive coordinator. The Bombers don't, at this point, want to do a complete rebuild. They want to tweak a few things and think that they can still be a Grey Cup caliber team, a competitive team in the West. Interestingly, as I said, they haven't announced that Jason Hogan has been let go. Richie Hall, the former defensive coordinator with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, took a step back when Jordan Younger got promoted to defensive coordinator. Is this a similar situation to Richie Hall where Jason Hogan takes a step back, maybe into that running backs coach role again, and they bring somebody else in? Tommy Condell, certainly a capable offensive coordinator in the league. Mike Miller, they're looking at maybe as a promotion from a QB coach with the Argos, and let Hogan do what he does best, try to boost those offensive numbers that did take a step back in 2025.
Okay, I'm going to say two things about this. A, wouldn't it be humiliating for Jason Hogan to step back? Where Richie Hall, this was thank you and you're on your way to retirement. We understand that, but we want to keep you with the organization. Can you be a mentor? Hogan isn't going to get that opportunity. And I don't know where he's going to be left if they make this move. Now, Tommy Condell, you talk about how great an offensive coordinator he is. Well, Ottawa last year was 9th in points for, 6th in net offense, and their rushing totals were well below what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers put up. Do you think Brady Oliveira is going to be happy with a Tommy Condell? I doubt it.
Zach Collaros maybe, though. They worked together previously with the Tiger Cats. I agree with what you're saying about Jason Hogan, and I think this puts him in a very awkward spot, knowing that there are people interviewing for the job that he currently holds without any kind of formal announcement. There may be those conversations already in the works that he knows he's not coming back. They just haven't made a formal announcement.
But then why don't you make that formal announcement? Why do you leave everybody think he's hanging in the wind? I don't understand the protocol here, and I don't understand the whole attitude behind this. If you're going to move on from him, go right to his door, knock on it, and say, thank you, but we've decided we don't need your services anymore. There are 8 other teams in this league, give you every reference you need. Why play this way unless Hogan himself said, look, I don't want to do this anymore? And we haven't heard that.
I'm with you. It is very strange. It's a situation that you don't often see. Now, the current 1-year contract that he is on would expire at the end of 2025. We're a month away from the end of the year. Does that come into play of why they haven't done it? I don't know. Are they looking at the operations cap? That shouldn't really come into play with only 1 month left in the contract. Anyway, it is a very weird situation. And as much as people talk about Mike O'Shea being loyal to a fault, this, and maybe this isn't O'Shea, maybe this is more Kyle Walters. This is showing, I think, less loyalty. And it's a bit embarrassing for Jason Hogan to know that there's at least 2 other people that are interviewing for his job.
I have yet to hear a general manager saying that the coach doesn't control his own coaching staff. The head coach always has that responsibility. So this goes back on Mike O'Shea. And if Mike O'Shea is second guessing this situation, which he's entitled to, I don't begrudge him, but the way it's been handled, I don't think is really befitting of a team that's supposed to be so respected in the league for what they do and how they handle their people. This is a step backwards in my estimation, and the Bombers need to be called out just a little bit over what they're doing in this. If they want Tommy Condell, then put it out that Jason Hogan is no longer a part of this organization, or he came to us and we've agreed that he will move back to running backs coach, give him more time to learn the position. This is not a Richie Hall type of deal. This is totally different. And I don't see how this is going to be a great situation going forward. And sure, Zach Collaros may be happy that if it's Tommy Condell, it might be Mike Miller, who did some offensive coordinatorship in the NFL in his past. This is a passing league. Yes, very important. Zach Collaros on board, but the Bombers are very good at rushing. Only the Stampeders had better rush yards last year. Typically, the Bombers are the best. What does Brady Oliveira do in that circumstance? If he's so upset at Hogan, where's he going to be next?
He's also a free agent coming up, a potential free agent, I should say. He's still currently under contract. That contract also ends very shortly. The inner workings of this whole situation are very interesting. Do the Bombers already think that they're not going to be able to keep Brady under contract? They're looking at some other options. We know they had another running back that showed some flashes early on this season when Brady was injured. Matthew Peterson, in that backup role to Brady Oliveira, showed some flashes when Brady went down hurt in game 1 of the season as well. We know he's not going to come at the same price tag that Oliveira does. Is he a capable enough running back that they can say goodbye to Brady, really retool and focus on that passing attack, maybe bring in some other receivers? As we said, Keon Hatcher is a name that might be out there. There's a lot of inner workings, but I agree, this is a very strange and at this point poorly handled situation with that offensive coordinator position.
Third down.
U Sport. First, let's congratulate the Montreal Carabins, who defeated the University of Saskatchewan Huskies in the Vanier Cup in Regina. Picked up their second Vanier Cup victory in 3 years. For the Huskies, that's a string of losses now that date back to 1998, where they've been in the Vanier Cup, have not been able to come home with the trophy. Carabins just looked like the better team on the day. Watching the game, they just started to dominate, and Pepe Gonzalez as their quarterback. I don't think there was a single ball that he threw all afternoon where there was a Huskies defender getting a hand on it.
Great effort by the Carabins as well. So they got a little bit of revenge on the province of Saskatchewan, not able to pull off the Vanier Cup as well as the junior football crown and the Grey Cup and the women's crown. So they were 3 of 4 in the province of Saskatchewan. The Carabins put the brakes on that at the Vanier.
Coming out of Quebec is more interesting news that the Bishop Gators are heading back to the RESQ, which is the Réseau des Sports Étudiants du Québec. And they were members of that years ago. In fact, they left in 2017. They had participated with the Atlantic University Sport, and that's teams like St. Mary's and St. Francis Xavier out on the East Coast. But because of travel considerations and their contract with the AUS was wrapping up at the end of this month anyway. So it was a very amicable departure. It's a bit of a surprise where Bishops, who had been in basically Quebec football forever, and they're in Lennoxville, Quebec, moved away. Now they're back. Kind of an interesting story.
It is, and what a tough conference to move back into, where you've got the defending Vanier Cup champions in the Montreal Carabins, as well as the Laval Rouge et Or, the two kind of dominant football programs, not just in Quebec, but in Canada over the last several years. A tough ask for the Gators to get back in there and try to knock those two off of the top. But you're right, it does make sense from that travel and expense standpoint. It'll be tough for them to compete for that top spot, as I said, with the two teams that seem to really dominate. But they're back in it now, and we'll see how they perform.
Bishops went to the Loney Bowl, which is the AUS championship, 4 times in their 8 seasons, and they won it in 2024. Part of the move back to Quebec, not only for travel, but it's also for the different competition that they would be facing. And clearly, Laval and Montreal have, especially Laval, but now Montreal, have really been dominant football programs in U Sport for the past quarter century. Bishops was a part of it. They left it. Now they're back. If you want to be a champion, you got to beat the champions, and they're going to be now in your division.
I certainly expect Bishops to rise to the occasion against that competition, and it just creates a bit of a tougher road. You look at some of the divisions in sport, the American League East in baseball, where you've got the Yankees and Red Sox spending infinite amounts of money to build their rosters. Toronto Blue Jays this year, to knock those two teams off the top, they rose to that occasion. Can they sustain it? That's the question for the Blue Jays, because we know the Yankees and Red Sox are going to want to get back on top of that division. Similar thing here, right? Bishops is now coming in, and they're not that top dog. There's two other teams that have very well-established programs. You want to compete against the best. If they can make it through this conference, they've got a really good shot at a Vanier Cup.
On this podcast, we refer a lot to the work that's done by Three Down Nation. And in fact, Andrew Hoskins, who's going to be on our next podcast, is one of the contributing writers to that enterprise. They have been bought out by Harvard Media. If you're not in Western Canada, and especially not in Saskatchewan, Harvard Media may not mean that much to you, but Harvard Media has a significant role with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, has a lot of clout with the radio stations that they have. Buying Three Down Nation, this is going to inject some capital into that company, and also, I hope and I trust, will continue to expand their coverage.
Justin Dunk was a big part of both Three Down Nation and the Riders radio broadcasts as the host of the pregame and the halftime shows on a Harvard Media station. This is a great partnership. I'm excited and happy for our friends at Three Down Nation as well. I think this will give them even more visibility and more of a boost. They're already, other than the host broadcasters, kind of that top news source for CFL news, a dedicated team of writers with Justin Dunk, John Hodge, JC Abbott as the three kind of faces of Three Down Nation, but all those contributing writers across the country as well. I hope for the best, and I think this is a great boost for Three Down Nation.
The fact that Three Down Nation is being quoted now by players in post-game interviews, and I think back to Isaac Adedemi Berglund and his anger-filled rant about Montreal getting no respect, and he refers to Three Down Nation as one of the places. You know that you're doing well if you're being noticed by the players in the league. That means something to you. Also, Three Down has really filled the void. Used to be the purview of radio stations, newspapers, and and a lot of television stations, I'll put it that way, in this country. When budgets got restricted, they came in and said, wait, this needs coverage. And they've put in a ton of effort to build this up. And they're doing an amazing job for the Canadian Football League, as well as U Sport and junior football.
And they ask those tough questions. As an independent, as not the host broadcast team, they will hold players, coaching staff, front office to task, and the commissioner as well. They're not afraid to ask those tough questions that people want answers to. I really enjoy the way they go about it. They're thoughtful answers. They don't try to embarrass anybody or one-up them, but they want to get the full story.
They have a principle that they have to respect the product. It's sort of a throwback to the old way of news reporting, where you went in, you found out what the story was, but you weren't out to get them. You were out to cover them. And this is the way Three Down Nation sees it. Annually, 3 million views. I'm sure I'm responsible for quite a few of those. Touchdown Kelowna. Here we come. That was announced in the last 24 hours. 2 dates for the British Columbia Lions. On Saturday, June 27th, 2026, they host the Calgary Stampeders. And on Saturday, July 4th, they will host the Edmonton Elks in Kelowna at the Apple Bowl. It should be expanded roughly to 17.5, maybe more. Kickoff in Kelowna. People there were ultra happy to see this coming, even though the Kelowna area is going to host other events, such as the Memorial Cup, which is a junior hockey championship, that this 2 home date week for the BC Lions and all the activities that are going with it will be a bigger boon than anything else they're doing.
There are a lot of BC Lion fans in the interior of BC where Kelowna is located. It's a trek for those fans to get to Vancouver to attend a Lions game in person. They're bringing that talent and that show to Kelowna back-to-back weekends. I love the fact that it's back-to-back weeks as well. I think that will really allow them to celebrate and build momentum over the course of those 2 weekends. And I expect to see some pretty big crowds cheering on the Lions, and a couple of rivalry games as well. They get two Western opponents in the Elks and the Stampeders. Should be a big draw, and it's not a ridiculously far trek for those Stampeders fans to head into the mountains either. So you might see some red and white in the stands as well, maybe some green and gold when the Elks come to town as well.
Kelowna is a big destination for people on the prairies. The irony is that the Stampeders were supposed to have representatives at this press conference, but they got snowed in Calgary. They closed the airport for a time, and they couldn't get out to this. The reason why they're having to do this is, of course, there's something called the World Cup of Soccer, I believe, that's happening in 2026 from June 11th to July 19th. 7 games will be held in Vancouver. They're going through the process of upgrading BC Place Stadium right now to get it ready for these soccer matches. I wonder, and I haven't talked to anybody about this, but is the CFL being compensated for being dislocated?
That's a great question. And I would imagine there is some of that in the works somewhere along the way, but that's perhaps a question for the commissioner or maybe some of those team presidents to see what was on the table for them. Just looking at the map, it's about a 4-hour drive, Vancouver to Kelowna, under a 7-hour drive from Calgary to Kelowna as well. So certainly a reasonable distance for people maybe to spend an extra long weekend in Kelowna driving out from Calgary, taking in some CFL action.
It's something they do anyway. This isn't really out of their normal routine. People from Alberta, especially Western Alberta, wind up in Kelowna by the bucketful. I think this is a win-win. Edmonton, it's a little bit further away. It's a little bit more north. It certainly is palatable for them to get there. I'm going to see if I can make it. I'm in Saskatchewan. I'm going to see if I can make it to one of the games. I think this would be a fantastic experience.
And this is a good test for the CFL as well to see what that draw is. And we know multiple expansion teams are a dream and not something that we're going to see in 2026, 2027. But there's talk about that expansion to the 10th team. Obviously, that would have to be in the East to help balance things out. For example, we can get that 10th team either in Quebec City or somewhere in the Maritimes. If you want to do that next round of expansion, you look at the other option in the East of whichever one doesn't get the team, so be it. Quebec City gets 10, maybe Halifax gets 11, maybe the BC Interior gets 12, and we've got 2 6-team divisions.
It's possible. I think we're looking way down the road to see if that comes out. There are YouTube videos where people postulate where you could put teams. Saskatoon, you could go to Victoria, Kelowna would be an option. But I don't think BC Lions would be really thrilled, since they are the BC Lions, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders would be thrilled since they are the Saskatchewan Roughriders, to have another team in the neighborhood. Most likely the best bet for an expansion franchise, and given the hotbed that it is, Ville de Quebec or Quebec City, that is your primo pick. You don't get to Atlantic Canada, but you get the 10th team. And look at the rivalry: Quebec, Montreal, and Ottawa. Wow, that triangle would go crazy.
It would. And I'm just thinking, like I said, it's a bit of a pipe dream getting to 12. Saskatoon would be a real tough sell in the province of Saskatchewan, because we know that the Riders draw such a fan base from across the province. And with the small population of the province itself, just over 1 million people, there's way more than that already in Vancouver. There's 4 or 5 million in that Vancouver area. You look at that interior of BC. Yes, I know the Lions have that province tag on their name. In the interior of BC, you got Kelowna and Kamloops are quite decent sized cities, Penticton as well, and lots of smaller communities to draw from. So I think it could be viable in there in the right circumstance. These 2 games are going to see what that interest is in that area of the province. Again, pipe dream years down the road. But if these 2 games sell out or get close to sold out, 15,000 plus at each one, the league's got to take notice of that.
One thing, though, that you will be tapping into is the summer crowd that's already there. You've got people in Penticton for the summertime vacation. It's an easy scoot up to get to Kelowna from there. They could get to 20,000. The Lions are not trying to vet the city to see if they can have competition in their market. They are trying to promote their brand. And I think Amar Daman is doing a fantastic job of doing that, getting the team name out across British Columbia. It is tougher in BC because of the mountains. This is a great opportunity for the Lions to promote their brand in the Kootenays and get Kelowna on board. And if you can draw 1,000 people from Kelowna over the season, you've won.
Exactly. This is a promotional opportunity for the Lions. I just think I'm excited for those people that live in the interior, that maybe those mountains are a barrier keeping them from getting to Vancouver often. I'm sure, lifelong BC Lion fans living in the BC interior that have been to maybe a handful or less Lions games in person, to bring that to their backyard and give them the opportunity to come cheer on their team. I think this is a great opportunity, and you should see the boost certainly in merchandise and perhaps in people making that trek to Vancouver to take in an extra game or two over the course of the season.
It speaks to what the CFL is moving toward, and I trust we'll find a way to get there. And that is making each home date an event. The Toronto Blue Jays, for all their attendance, draw from all over Canada. People make it a destination to get there. This is what the CFL, I trust, is trying to do as well. You get your home dates to be events, and you draw from around the area and tie in a lot of activities to make people excited about being there.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble podcast. Audio worth watching.